It's now my pleasure to introduce best-selling author Douglas Brunt. A native Philadelphian, he was the CEO of the security company Authentium until 2011. The following year, he released his debut novel, the New York Times bestseller Ghosts of Manhattan. That success was followed by his second novel, The Means. Forbes magazine has called him a persuasive storyteller, and Steve Forbes said of his first novel that readers will have a literary feast devouring this book. His new book, Trophy Son, takes on the ruthless dynamic of father-son relationships in our achievement-consumed society. Sports Illustrated calls this look at the world of competitive tennis keenly observed and provocative, and The Observer hails it as a wise novel whose lessons go well beyond sports. I think it's his best book yet. When the library had asked me if I wanted to introduce Doug, as we're both Haverford School alumni, she politely inquired if he and I knew each other. After I make the following introduction, you can decide if you can answer that question yourselves. I am proud to call Doug a friend, although maybe friend isn't quite strong enough. Doug and I were classmates and football teammates at Haverford. Together we went on to Duke University, where we were fraternity brothers and roommates. Soon after college, we both found ourselves in San Francisco, where our friendship continued. As I married, and then he did, we were the best man at each other's wedding as well. More recently, I've also embarked on my own writing career, and Doug's counsel has been instrumental in helping me complete my first book, which ironically I did this morning, so it's great that Doug's here now. His talk tonight will be a conversation with his wife, NBC journalist Megyn Kelly. While some of you may not know who Doug is, Megyn needs no introduction. The only thing I will offer is that 99.9% of those who know her know the polished, fearless, and beautiful TV anchor and journalist. I, however, am proud to say that I know her more as Doug's wife, and am more accustomed to seeing her in a t-shirt and yoga pants with one of their 3 fabulous children perched on her hip. We're so pleased to have them here tonight with us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Doug Brunt and Megyn Kelly to the Free Library.
So hi everybody, I'm Megyn Kelly. This is my husband Doug Brunt. I'm married well. I always say I love when people meet Doug because I just think he reflects so well on me. You know how that saying, show me who you love and I'll show you who you are? Nailed it. And there's my mother-in-law, there's your mom. Jackie Brunt in the audience, who we love. And you'll get to know, thank you. Through some of this discussion, you'll come to know her well. So, Doug was saying he was really looking forward to this because he thought it was going to be a cinch. So I'm just going to start right in. When was the last time you had to say you're sorry? No, too much? Okay, we'll ease into it.
That is funny.
We'll talk later. Okay, so first of all, one of the things I love about Doug's writing career is that they call him the Michael Lewis of fiction. And if you're a reader, you know what that means. This is a guy who takes nonfiction subjects like Moneyball, which became a book of his and then a movie, and writes all about them in a way that is very user-friendly, and really you get to understand something about society and you hear a story at the same time. And I think that's what Doug does in the fiction world, so I loved it that he was described that way, because that's how I read his books. The first one was with the background of Wall Street. The second one was with the background of politics and media. And this latest one has a backdrop of tennis and sports and what we do as parents to our children. And it's called Trophy Son. Okay, so it's a USA Today notable book. It's a New York Post must-read book. And I want to start with this quote from The Observer, which says, "This wise novel explores the themes of sacrifice and maniacal parenting and alerts us to the cost of success. The lessons go well beyond sports." So, why tennis and why this subject?
Well, as I was sitting down, as you suggested, I have picked larger subject areas, Wall Street, politics, and now sports, and then tried to whittle that down into a fictional story that enables me to explore the themes that are interesting to me or disturbing to me. And I picked sports because we're now experiencing this shift in parenting and the way that kids are experiencing athletics that is new to me. When Megyn and I were growing up, and Bill mentioned our football experience, when we were kids, 8, 9 years old, we were not really in any kind of structured athletic program. We played in the woods, and we played in the yard, and we played ball in the neighborhood with other kids. But now our oldest is 7, and we're on the cusp of entering this travel sports phenomenon. And it has the intensity of professional or college level sports. You have to give up every weekend for 8 or so soccer games and every weekday evening for practices. And so I wanted to explore that a little bit. I picked tennis because tennis is really at the extreme end of this. Tennis in the 80s was the only thing that's kind of like soccer and lacrosse is today. And with tennis, if you're very good, you don't even finish high school. You go off to Florida for one of the tennis academies, sort of like a Bollettieri Academy. And you're not really schooled in a normal way. You do some classes, but basically you're on the tennis court 8 hours a day. And so I wanted to explore this shift in parenting and in experience for youth who are trying to have an athletic experience. And it's gotten so far along now that the parents are sort of these reluctant participants in this whole environment, because I think sports are very important. It's a great way to learn discipline and teamwork and practice equals improvement, things we want our kids to have, in addition to our kids finding a passion for something. But it's gotten to the point where if you want your kids to have a high school athletic experience, they need to start the travel team at 8 years old. And if you don't, you're no longer mainstreaming your kids. And in addition to that, the travel teams at these young ages, the coaches push you to specialize in just one sport. If you're doing soccer, they don't want you to also do lacrosse. They want you to stick with your one sport. And so the thing that disturbs me the most about it is the early single sport specialization. And tennis just happens to be a great way to, explore that theme, because tennis is, I think, as grueling and as requires as much of a sacrifice as any of these sports.
All right, now that we have the headline of the book, let's take a step back. We'll get back into Trophy Son a little bit more in a minute. But this is a Philadelphia audience, and you set this book with the backdrop of Philadelphia. Anton is from Philadelphia, the suburbs, and there's a reason for that, because writers write what they know. So tell us about your connection to this town.
Well, so many friends from growing up are here. My mom still lives in the area, so we are back here a number of times
Where
a year.
specifically? What is the street address?
So it's an incredible place to grow up. The Philadelphia, we're out in the suburbs in Radnor, and when we were looking around for neighborhoods in New York, we thought, man, it would be great if we could find a place like that, because Megyn would experience it coming back to visit my mom, and there isn't one. No. There is no New York suburb that we liked as much. And it's just an incredible place, and near and dear to my heart. Many close friends and family are here. And when you pick a place to set a novel, it is easier to pick a place that you know well, because you're not just then describing streets and buildings, and you can really convey an emotion and feeling, and it's a much more effective way to set a scene. You
know what's amazing about Doug's family? So Doug is the third of 4 children, and I think Bill would back me up that all of the Brunt children are overachievers. They're all extremely smart, they're all extremely loving, they're polite, they're kind, they're good kids, they're good friends, they're good spouses. But my own impression, and Jackie, we're giving you the microphone soon, is that there was not this pressure to achieve, to win, to kill or be killed the way you've documented in Trophy Son, right?
There was not in my family, no. It was, go out and do your best. And my parents had a rough idea of what our best could be. And when we were not delivering that, they would know that we were slacking off. But it wasn't setting goals for us that we weren't interested in setting for ourselves. And it wasn't, coming up with arbitrary milestones and things. They just said, go out and do well, do your best.
But I think this is a shift. I mean, a lot of parents struggle with this. You want your kids not to be losers, and yet so you want to push them a little, but you don't want to turn into Anton's father. And Anton, of course, is the star of the book, and his relationship with his overbearing father is what we learn about page after page, and you root for Anton, and you want to have a talk with that dad, and you don't want to be that parent. So what do you think? Where do we draw the line in trying to raise 4 successful Brunt children to get that, instead of crossing over to get the abusive, excessive pressure that Anton's dad puts on him?
Well, we talk about this a bit, obviously, and I think that one of the things that my parents did that we also try to do that helps is you do have to force. Like, occasionally they need to be forced into something, but it really is until they've had a real shot at trying it out. our son doesn't want to try skiing, or he doesn't want to try this baseball thing. But we make him go, and we make him go enough times until he's really experienced it. And more than half the time, and it was the same with me, more than half the time they end up liking it and then doing it for a while. But then they want to say, no, I'm tired of that, I want to try this. And so our approach is to make them try as many different things as we can. So they're doing, I don't know how many different things our kids are currently doing. But then it shifts, and then it might come back around. And they do need to be made to do it sometimes. But I think the best thing you can do is encourage them to find something that they're then going to be passionate about. Like, they hated piano forever, but now our oldest is actually kind of loving piano. Mm-hmm. So he's not going to be doing it, we're not tiger moms and dads about it. But
now, Anton's dad is the least likable character in the book, arguably. There's a couple of other contenders, but I would say he's the one who makes you feel the most anger and frustration. And to some extent, we all know this parent, right? The one who's in there just pushing and pushing and pushing and taking all the fun out of the game and it's like changing the experience into something that no one is able to enjoy. No one is able to. This was not your experience growing up, and you did not have a dad that was anything like this.
Right. I love tennis, and I loved my experience with tennis. My dad, I never even played tennis competitively, so I wasn't even in a situation where I'd be pushed in that way, and my dad didn't do that with other sports either. But I knew enough about tennis to know some of the realities in the game, and I did a lot of research for this book, not just secondary research of reading biographies and other research on it, but I interviewed a bunch of players. I interviewed James Blake, I interviewed John Isner, and I also interviewed a bunch of players who had a similar experience from the ages of 8 to 18, but then never got to a number 4 in the world ranking like James Blake, people who maybe never cracked the 500, but they went to Bollettieri for 4 years or so. And then stayed in the game of tennis, but by the time they got to 20, tennis as a competing tour professional was over. But now they're club pros at tennis clubs or coaches and things like that. And I would say about half of them regret it. They say, man, I wish I had a norm. If I could go back, I would have gone to my junior prom instead of gone off to the tennis academy. I wish I had a childhood with a little bit more socialization in it. And the one guy was saying, he's this big, handsome, 6'3" tennis guy, and he's like, man, I went to my junior prom and I just didn't even know what to do. Like, I went on a date, I didn't even know what to do with girls. He had had no socialization other than people trying to build him into a great tennis player.
But we're doing this to our kids academically too. We live in New York City, and the pressure to achieve academic excellence at the expense of everything, right? They're so focused on the IQ that there's no development of the EQ. And then we send them out into the world and expect them to be able to relate to people and understand what real people care about and how to make friends and how to succeed at a business place. It's like your Harvard degree may not win you any friends or a great spouse or a boss who likes you.
I think there's a backlash not only against early single sport specialization and some of the athletic pieces we've talked about, but also in the schools, because we've taken a lot of different looks at school, and Bill Yo is very involved in academics and schooling. And when we're looking around at different schools, some were described as homework factories, and that was just an immediate eliminator for us. Like, we are not going to send our kid to a homework factory.
They're bragging about it.
We want them to have other experiences. And I think on the sports side, a number of high-profile athletes are also raising awareness around this. Steph Curry wrote a great piece saying that if you want to be a great basketball player, play more than basketball for as long as you can. And McEnroe says that playing soccer helped him with his footwork in tennis. And it's the same kind of thing. There needs to be more range of experiences. And so I think with the academics, I agree, there needs to be fun and some folly that is also a contributor to personal growth.
The heart of the book is Anton and his struggle to find his soul, really, to find his soul. In Ghost of Manhattan, your debut novel, New York Times bestseller, it was a man's struggle to save his soul. This is a fully grown, mature adult who had found himself immersed in Wall Street and the debauchery of it, trying to figure out whether this was a conscious choice and this is how he wanted to live. Anton's a kid. We meet him when he's how old?
8-ish.
And so you see this kid mature or try to. Do Is that something that you struggle with? Because you see this theme there's a little bit of this in The Means as well, but it's mostly the first and the third novel where you're really touching in on somebody's struggle to really save or find their soul.
Well, I think it's something that everyone can relate to. I mean, even in your interview with J.D. Vance last night, he said the book wasn't about working something out and completing this endeavor of self-discovery. It was the beginning of something that he'll be doing for the rest of his life. And so, I hope I'm always growing and learning more about myself. And that process that I experience is how I can try to weave that into a fictional experience where I'm exploring a point or a theme. And then hopefully readers can connect with that. And it's why, every reader connects with a book differently from another reader, or everyone who looks at a painting has a different individual, customized feeling because their own experience are part of then that viewing experience or that reading experience.
Well,
and they sort of fill in the gaps with their own experience on what's in there.
A piece of the book that I think reveals something about you too is his love of reading. And this is an outlet for him, despite all of the things that are being put on him. And you've talked before publicly about how you were painfully shy as a child. Those are your words. And reading was an outlet for you. It was an oasis for you.
Yeah, I was very shy as a kid. I think somewhere in the sort of high school range, started coming out of that. But I read all the early books. I would read all the Hardy Boys books, and my mom, so I'd go down to the basement and plow through all those books, and have always loved reading. And that was what I never approached writing as a career choice until much later. I never took creative writing classes. I just have always loved being around books and reading, and sort of hobbied around the writing side of it.
And tennis too. So that tennis has been an ongoing love of your life. Do I overstate the case?
A great pleasure.
Okay. I don't want to give myself competition. But what is it about tennis that made it so well suited for this book?
Well, one thing I liked about picking tennis is there's not a lot of fiction that explores the game. There are tons of books on baseball and other sports. There's not that much fiction around tennis. There's David Foster Wallace, which Andy and I were talking about earlier, Andy who runs this place, and not much beyond that. And so it was interesting, and I knew enough to sort of explore some of the things I wanted to explore with tennis. But then it really was, it's an isolating sport, it's a grind. It's this 11-month season when you're out traveling around, and so many of the people I talked to as part of the research and that I talked to it's being read on the pro tour a lot. James Blake was at the French Open. He's like, everyone on the tour is reading your book right now. We're all devouring this thing. And I've had a bunch of tennis journalists who were at the majors email me saying they want to write about the book, and they're really interested in how it's portraying the tour. But it's a grind out there. These guys are on the road, so they'll say, this one guy was saying when he was 20 and he was on the tour, he'd meet a girl in, Florida, and she'd say, well, can we get together next week? He's like, let's see, next week I'm in Switzerland, and then I'm in Australia, and then and it just goes on and on. They basically get only December off. And there's so much about the tour that I think most people don't know. Most of us associate it with doubles and lemonade, and it's a fun social thing, but tennis, when you're good, is one of the least social sports out there.
Mm-hmm. And isolating on the court as well. I mean, in a very unique way.
It is one of the few sports where you can have no communication with your coach, and you don't really talk to your opponent. Even with boxing, you're sort of rubbing foreheads, and you can, talk trash. With tennis, you really, you sort of the changeover. Maybe you see the other play a little bit, but you can't talk to your coach. You're just in this bubble out there for a few hours playing, and the whole life is that way.
And then if you achieve great success, you find yourself in a different kind of bubble. And that's what happens to Anton, where you get surrounded by
your entourage.
An entourage that protects you even more from real life, real people. And it can be potentially very damaging, and as we see in the book, it can introduce some nefarious elements into one's life that can be very corruptive.
Right. And in a way, those are the lucky ones, because the other hard thing about tennis is there's not a big financial payoff. When you get off the top 10, it's just a cliff in terms of prize money. And someone's done some research about where the break-even is for your tennis ranking and when you're making enough money just to break even, because you still have to pay a coach, you pay all your flights and hotel bills to get around to these tournaments. A lot of expenses associated with being on the tour. And the math came out to be, you have to be ranked about 55 in the world to be actually breaking even. And if you're ranked higher, then you're making some money. And it's different from golf even. The purse money in golf is much higher than tennis. I think the break even in golf was something like, in the hundreds. But tennis doesn't pay as much. You get these tour wins and you get $10,000 or something.
There's a documentary out now called Dancer. It's about this Ukrainian dancer, Sergei Polunin. And this is a guy who's been one of the world's top ballet dancers, but is just now venturing off into sort of his own dancing, not affiliated with any company, because he wants to express himself in the way he wants and not necessarily dance exactly the way they want, and wants to make some money. And do you know that even in the New York City Ballet, apparently the top dancer, only 3 of the dancers listed in the entire company make more than $190,000 a year. I mean, these are the most elite dancers in the world. It's just not that kind of sport, profession, what have you. And tennis is the same in a way, in that only the top few actually earn a real living thanks to that enormous sacrifice.
That's right. And so many families pour out so much money from these early ages because all these little satellite tournaments that the 16-year-olds are going to, the family has to travel around and get a hotel, and you're still paying for coaches at that age. So it's an enormous expense to pursue this for many years, and then lottery odds of getting to be at the point where it's a financial return.
And how old once it's over? I mean, what's the average lifespan of a tennis career?
Well, I mean, Federer's defying that a little bit. He's 35, but really a 30-year-old Nadal is 30 and he's considered old. And these are the greats. It's younger for except doubles players can go on a little longer, but for most people it's in the 20s.
It's unbelievable. And then there are whole professions popping up to help these folks find their second career at age 30, right? Like headhunters who are trying to figure out not Nadal, but somebody less than Nadal in terms of success, figure out what to do.
And that's a tough thing because they don't know much beyond tennis in a way. That's why so many go on to be a club pro or a coach or try to get a job at the Tennis Channel and be a commentator, that kind of thing.
What do you think that this enormous pressure to achieve, to succeed, is doing to American families right now?
I think my own feeling is the way this bled into things is that it comes from a good place. I think most parents are wanting the best for their kids, and one of the things they want for their kids is to get them into a good college. And the mind frame when you and I and Bill and others in the audience were applying to college back in the 80s was be well-rounded, do lots of different things, play a couple sports, volunteer for a couple of organizations, be on student government. And that's a good-looking application. Now it's flipped on its head. It's no longer be well-rounded. The idea is be exceptional in one thing. Be Juilliard level great at the violin. And that's how you get into Yale or Harvard. And so then the training starts early, along the lines of the Tiger Mom book. They drill in violin lessons for hours, or, if you're a great lacrosse player, you've got a good shot at an Ivy League school. And so I think that's where it started, and it sort of bleeds to earlier and earlier ages. And it does sort of pull apart the family unit in some way, because we want to spend a lot of time with our kids on the weekends. And we wrestle with this. We're trying to resist any weekend activity for the kids because we want them to be with us. It's our time. And we want to take trips, and it's not always high quality time, but it's medium quality time, and that's good and adds up. And if you are on a 9-year-old travel team, that time is gone. You're off doing other things, and we're busy driving them around to different things. So.
And it's not quality time with your child.
That's no time with the child. Even like little, low quality time is something.
Right,
So.
It's nothing. We've talked about this many times. I grew up going to the town park, and that was fine. And then I'd come home, and my mom and dad would be there, and we'd have dinner together every Saturday and Sunday. There was no question but that we'd be spending the weekends together. And I think we would have felt it if one of us, the 3 of us children, was out on the road instead of with us. Mm-hmm. And yet we know so many people who are doing that already with their 6 and 7-year-olds. 6 and 7. are like away for a month at sports camp at 7 years old.
And look, that can be a great thing for some families. Sometimes a kid just loves ice hockey. We have a number of friends who have kids who are into ice hockey, or they love soccer. and you know, ultimately what we want is the kid to find something he's passionate about or she's passionate about. And so if that's it, then that's great. And for a lot of families, it's really working. But for others,
I disagree.
for others who are going along.
Doug's being so sensitive to anybody here who's made that choice.
But I think there are those who do it because they feel it's like a keeping up with the Joneses thing.
Right.
Not the Jonesies thing.
No, but it's true because we want our kids to play high school athletics. And now the messaging from society is unless you start them on said athletics right now, get them on the travel team this minute, they won't even make the high school team. It's not like we have dreams of sending them off to college on a scholarship. It's just, you know, you want high school athletics to be part of their experience.
Right.
And yet, you know, it may not be unless you join this crazy circle. One story about Tiger Mom, and then I want to ask you about process. So Tiger Mom, you know who that is? Amy Chua. She's a professor at Yale Law School now. She wrote the Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, or something like that. I interviewed her recently, and I said to her off camera, you know, one of the criticisms of your book is that it's very focused on how to get your kid into Harvard, but not at all focused on how to raise a happy child. And I said, I'm sure you've heard that. She said, yes, I've heard that many times. And whenever somebody raises that with me, I say, you're right. I should have focused more on happiness. And inside I'm thinking, yes, another one down.
My kid's going to destroy that kid.
That kid will crush your kid. Okay, so we sort of have the young Doug Brunt, who grew up in Philadelphia and is a local boy made good. But what the audience may not know is that young Doug Brunt, despite his love of literature, did not go into a literary career to start. After you graduated from Duke undergrad and then Georgetown for your MBA, you went out and you worked in business and you were an entrepreneur and you were running a company down in Florida when we met. And then our second child was born and something happened.
The writing career?
Yeah.
That was after the first child.
Well, we were on maternity leave with Yardley when you made it full time.
That's true. I've got my first publishing deal on the maternity leave with our second child. So I was frustrated with my job running the security company. That we had this is a whole longer story, but we had a very dysfunctional board of directors, and half my time was spent navigating the board fights and traveling around a lot. And Meg and I were walking in Central Park. So this is before the second child. We were strolling our newborn first child. And she was saying, gosh, you just seem like you're snapping all the time and you're short-tempered and unhappy and frustrated. And I said, yes. And we were talking about changes I could make. And at this time, I had been hobbying around with writing a draft of what became the first novel, just on the planes and things. And I wasn't thinking about this as a career. And our conversation moved from maybe switching to a different company or selling this company and doing something else to selling it and doing something entirely different and pursuing the writing. And at this time, I was, I think, still making more money than you. And so it was a real family decision to do something like this. It was a big step, but she was very supportive of it and said, you know, this would be great. You love it. And she had read this draft and thought it was good. And so I decided to start putting pieces in place to pursue that. And so I approached the board and said that I intend to leave. I'll stay for up to a year and lead the company through a sale if you want, or I'll leave now. I want to do the right thing by the company. And so they said, please stick around through a sale of the company, which I did. And I also found an agent and started working with the agent on drafts of the book. And fast forward roughly a year to that maternity, got my first publishing deal with Simon & Schuster. So that was a great step. But I still wasn't sure. I always thought, I'm not a real writer until I've done 3. Because, you know, it could have been one of those things where I wrote the novel and then checked the box, but now I'm going to go, you know, try and start another company or join another company. But I do love it. I love writing. I have a number of friends who are writers who feel like they've finished that book and then they'll never have another idea and they procrastinate. They don't want to start the next book. They'd rather come up with household chores and paint the house. But I'd love going there. It's still creative time. It's time to myself. And so I love that chunk of time when I'm in that phase of putting a few pages on the pile every day and writing in a regular way, I love doing that. So I'm still very happy and love this career.
I think it's a testament to how you can change your life at any age and any stage. If you get honest with yourself about your level of happiness and where you are, and just determined to make the next decision to change your life, that's the beginning of doing it.
Well, she had done it prior, so that was in part inspirational to my own decision. I think why you were so supportive of my taking that change as well, because you were a hardworking, unhappy lawyer who switched to journalism. And so part of the conversation we had in Central Park that day included her own experience of following something that she loved and making a change.
And because we knew that money wasn't important to us. It wasn't the driver. You know, it was each other and connecting with our friends and our family and our children. And so it was like, if I fail as a TV reporter or if you fail as a writer, so we've had a failure, but we have
Right.
us. Right. Okay. We're going to take some of your questions now and find out what you want to know about Doug. Okay. Given your favorable acknowledgement to James Blake and John Isner, why do you suggest all other pro tennis players are using drugs? This is another piece of the novel that's caused controversy.
Yeah, this was an interesting thing. When people first read the novel and they gave feedback, Anna Wintour read the novel and she wrote me this very glowing, nice email, which I loved. It didn't talk about steroids once, but there was a reporter for the Times who wanted to do a feature on it. And off the book page coverage of a novel is great. That's the best you can get, especially in the Times. And so he said, of course, this is great. But the angle he wanted to talk about was the drugs, which was a small but an important piece in the book. And then, of course, that consumed all media that came thereafter. That's the piece they wanted to talk about. And we know steroids are in the sport. There have been positive tests. There have been suspensions. There's a lot of buzz on the tour among players, rumor mongering type stuff. And then there's been a lot of reporting from credible sources talking about steroids on the tour and whether players can be ahead of the test, like in the way that Lance Armstrong was. So Nadal says, release all my tests. But we know now that that kind of a defense is meaningless because that was Lance Armstrong's defense for many years. He would say, I'm the most tested athlete on the planet. And he was just ahead of the test. And I did a lot of research for this book. I won't say who, but people in positions to know intimately. Many have said to me off the record that it's all over the tour. And I think, for me to omit that in the novel would be wrong. We know it's in there, and in a novel that's talking about the sacrifices required to play at an elite level, that has to be part of the discussion of the book. And so what I included in there was really no more than if you dig a little bit, you'll find reporting and discussion of this. So it had to be in there.
Doug, did you find the transition difficult in moving from the corporate world to becoming a full-time author? What do you miss most, and what do you like most now?
It was a difficult transition for me, and I thought a lot about this. When I was running the company, I also joined this group called YPO, which is Young Presidents Organization. And they have this element to YPO called Forum, where you meet with CEOs of other companies, usually 8 to 10 people, get together once a month for a few hours, and they discuss everything from personal issues to business issues, work-life balance, and it becomes this real intense, close camaraderie. And I love that, and I loved meeting with my executive team, and there was a time when I really loved all that. And I had so much human engagement throughout the day, meeting with employees and customers and things like that. And so when I started writing, that all went to zero. And I had not come up in writing, so I didn't have a lot of friends and colleagues who were going through these similar things and the challenges of writing in that kind of a life. And so I tried to replicate the YPO Forum. And it took a few years to meet enough writers to do this kind of thing. But then I met a few, and through them would meet a few, and I was just, uncommonly I think, because most writers that I've met don't do this. And I was always interested to meet more and then bring us together. And then I had this idea to start a book club for writers. And so I reached them out, and they all said, and some of them have been writing since the 70s, they'd been doing this. They said, this is such a great idea, I love this. And it was such a novel idea.
Can you tell them who's in it? Is that still secret?
No, it's Nelson DeMille has become a great friend and a mentor to me. So he's in it, and Lee Child, and Harlan Coben, and Amor Tolles. And
I
Joe Camp.
know, right?
There's like 10 of us who get together at our apartment every other month, and we pick a book and read the book. And then we start out, with cocktails, and we talk about the writing life for a while and what people are struggling with agents and publicity and Amazon and stuff like that. And it's great for me because Nelson's been a big star since the 70s, and he's seen this industry evolve so much. And I'm only in it for 5 or 6 years, and all these guys have different, opinions and perspectives on it. So it's been great for me, but they're all, it's become a lovely time for all of us. And so I sort of modeled it in a way off of the forum.
It's very sweet. Our 3 little kids are out there in their pajamas serving the hors d'oeuvres.
Yeah, that's great. But so anyway, that helped me fill a void that I was missing from my professional time before this career.
And the other piece of it was, what do you like the most about it?
That time when I'm writing, I love that time. I love reading through the work product at the end, and when you
the writing's in the morning.
The writing's in the morning. Usually we do drop where our kids go to different schools, so it's all hands on deck in the morning. Meg will go one way, I'll go the other. The kids, by 9 o'clock, the kids are all in school, and I'll usually write from 9 to 12, Monday to Friday. And then in the afternoons I'll do editing or research or reading. But yeah, when you finish a page, and Bill, I know you're already experiencing this, when you've written a paragraph that just feels right, like, man, I captured that exactly, and I captured it in a way that no one else has, and I think that's gonna, like, people are gonna stop at the end of that paragraph and think, well done on that one. Mm-hmm. And you hope you can deliver something like that. What I hope to do is at the end of every page, a reader gets something out of that page. Mm-hmm. It's worthwhile.
How has the world of professional tennis responded to your novel?
Well, the world is pretty broad there. Specifically, the ITF and the ATP were not happy. They sent some letters, in part because the New York Times guy was digging around. That got everybody a little amped up. And the Times is involved, and they want to talk about performance-enhancing drugs. So that got a big reaction and some letters. And so I met with Macmillan Legal, and we were fine. This is a novel. It's a fictional account. It's characters in fiction.
They tried to scare him into not publishing it,
Yeah.
but he didn't back down.
Yeah, and I was very happy with my lawyers. They said, we'll defend vigorously, so we were in good shape on that. But that's one little tiny slice of the world. Most of the world has been really supportive, from Anna Wintour, who's just a big fan of it, to James Blake, who loved the book. He said he read it on the flight over to Paris to cover the French Open.
To tennis coaches.
To tennis coaches, to former tennis players. Like there's the one club pro in Westchester, New York, who went to Bollettieri, and he said, I'm obsessed with it. I've already read it twice. I'm giving it to everybody. And he said every club pro up here needs to read and recommend this book. So he's been my best salesman. To the tennis journalists who have read it. A number have reached out to me. People who work for the Tennis Channel or people who write for the different tennis magazines have read it and loved it.
I think as a recovering lawyer and journalist, when I heard the letters from the, whatever they're called, the tennis officials, my first instinct was, methinks thou doth protest too much. I mean, if there's nothing there, if there's no problem in tennis, why are they so agitated about what was written in a novel? In a novel, yeah. Something said by a fictional character. I submit that to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Figure that out on your own. Did you ever want to become a professional tennis player?
No more than I wanted to become a professional writer. This one worked out, but you can do it when you're old. I loved, this is one of the things that my dad and I in particular loved to do. We would watch, in the era of the Borg and McEnroe and Connors matches, we would watch those, and, he could really sort of analyze the games, and that was our thing, It's like that baseball thing, like my dad and I could never talk, but we could watch baseball. It wasn't like that because we could also talk, but tennis was what we would watch the most, and I loved watching the game and loved playing it with him, and, idolized those guys in the way that kids idolize Jeter now, but I never really thought about approaching tennis as a career. I never picked it as a sport that I played even in high school, but always loved it.
And now you do that with our son. eventually all of them, but our oldest son is 7, so he's kind of at the age now. I haven't told you this story, but Doug was playing a tennis match yesterday morning, and so I brought the 3 kids down to go watch a little bit. And Yates, our 7-year-old, who's been watching some tennis with Doug, and I don't play tennis, I don't know anything about tennis, you know. I mean, it's a lovely game, but I don't know how to play it. I really don't even understand the rules, as will become clear in a minute. And so Yates, watching you play, you know, he said, "Daddy, are you winning?" And you said, "Well, we won the first set, and it's whatever it is in the second set." And Yates looked at me, and I'm trying to think of something. I'm trying to add some value to a game I don't understand. And I'm like, "How many sets in a match?" And he was like, 3. And I was like, "Right." All I could think was, aren't there different rules when it's men versus women and the professionals? Like here at club tennis, it is 3, but I've already misinformed him. Okay. Does your novel have any similarities to the life of Andre Agassi?
Some. That was one of the biographies I read. And what I found in doing my research is that what's remarkable about Agassi's story is that it's so unremarkable. It's so common on the tour. When you look at crazy parents, Mary Pierce, Steffi Graf, Agassi, I mean, the list goes on. They all have, not all, but many have a domineering father or a strong and domineering mother. And, you know, while Agassi went to Bollettieri, so have, you know, tens of thousands of players gone down to one of these tennis academies. And in talking to people, they all have a story in and around like this. I mean, the club pro in Westchester was like, "You have written my life story here." And this is a guy whose top ranking was probably 500 in the world at one time.
Wow.
But it's not Agassi. It's a pretty accurate and credible fictional account of what life can be like on the tour.
Okay, because this is 2017, America, there's a Trump question in here. And I am going to read it to you because this actually involves some crossover, unbeknownst to whoever wrote this question, between your life and your tennis and our president. The question is, how did you and your family deal with Trump's outrageous behavior toward your wife?
Well, you know, we have a strong connection to begin with, and we have a strong, you know, when the chips are down, we're together more than ever and there for each other more than ever, and so in that way, we were, you know, even more of a team than we needed to be, or than we might otherwise have been. I mean, it was just instinctive and automatic how we kind of came together as a unit. And there was so there was this one.
It was an incident.
Yeah, we were playing tennis at the same place, and there's this tournament every summer. And my partner and I, it's a doubles thing, and he and I played the same tournament every year for like 30 years now. And we got to the finals, and it was a tough match. It's best of 3 sets. We lost in a tiebreaker in the 3rd set. So we lost the match, and I was, you know, mad. And
the match was in August of 15.
August of 15. So things were the debate had already happened, but Trump was not yet the nominee of the Republican Party. So the match was over. People are filling out. A lot of family and, you know, other people. It's at a club. It's a private club. So most people are sort of off the court by this time, and I was still being on. I had left something on the court, so you went on to get something, get my whatever I left
waiting
off
for
the
you.
court.
I was waiting for you to come off the court.
Okay, and so one of the players from the other team at that time pointed right at Meg's chest and said, "Trump 2016." And I didn't see that, but she came over and she goes, "That guy's really rude." And I said, "What happened?" And she tells me, and I went bananas. And so I go storming back on the court and grab the guy, and if you ever talk to my wife that way again, and, you know, all sorts of threats. And he says, "Oh, I did. I was pointing to my wife. I wasn't pointing to her."
Yeah.
And I was, you know, of course that wasn't true, and I knew that wasn't true. So
it was very
I made
sexy.
more threats.
It was great. I didn't love the incident, but I loved your reaction. It was good.
So anyway, that turned into a whole, like, disciplinary meeting, thing at the club.
The tennis professionals.
Yeah.
Oh, the committee.
But otherwise, we didn't deal with too much, personal stuff. There were lots of threats and things like that, obviously, but not many reached our front door, really. But we had to take lots of precautions and things like that. So it was a weird year.
So just a note on that, because I wrote about this story in my book, and one of the heroines of the aftermath of the Trump nonsense was my mother-in-law, Jackie Brunt, who is the most dear, lovely, sincere person. And she was with us at the beach. We were at the beach for a lot of August after that presidential debate when Trump was, pretty relentless. And she was driving home from the beach one night, and she pulled over and said, I just wanted to tell you, I pulled over at the Wawa because I really want to have a conversation with you about how you are, and to tell you that no one is listening to what he's saying about you or believing what he is saying about you, and the world can see who you truly are. And just, hearing something like that from someone like her meant so much. I can still get emotional about it. But it explains a lot about Doug and how he wound up too. All right, last question. What the audience may not know is that you already have your 4th novel written. And are you willing to reveal anything about it?
It's set in a Wawa. The main character is a writer of literary fiction, and his best friend is a writer of commercial fiction. And the funny thing is, I started this as my 3rd novel, and then I put it to the side because I hadn't quite figured out what I was going to do with it, and then I started Trophy Son, which has now become the 3rd novel. So this will be the 4th, but the early draft, so it really was the 3rd. And since that time, I've met so many other writers that are both literary and commercial, that it's informing the book, but I might have to be a little careful too about how everyone thinks, if I had a nickel for everyone who thought they were a character in one of my novels.
The book club may disband.
Yeah, that's right, exactly, could end things. But it talks about some of the differences and how different literary and commercial writers view themselves and how the world views them and the tensions between them. Every commercial writer would like some more literary acclaim, and every literary writer would like to have 1/10 of the sales of Stephen King. There are people who win Pulitzers and National Book Awards, and you wouldn't believe how little their sales are and how little money they make for these books. So just as one example, so it explores things like that, and it starts out as more of a literary book, but then Murder Happens becomes more of a commercial book in the end.
Well, I'll say this, since our talk has in some ways been the outline is how awesome the Brunts are, the Philadelphia Brunts. Despite the encouragement your family provided to you to achieve, and the fact that you did, you and your brothers and your sister and your mom, Manly's no longer with us, have always stayed so humble. And just in getting ready for this event and another one we did down in Washington, I actually went to your reviews. I pulled them all up, the reviews that have been done of Trophy Son. And I found a ton of awesome reviews that he never sent to me. Now, I would have had those over to him in a New York minute. Look what they said.
That's not true.
It is true. And honestly, he's not even forwarding them anymore. And they're awesome. Sports Illustrated and Vogue and the AP and Time and on the list goes of the lovely, lovely reviews of Trophy Son, honey. So congratulations. I'm proud of you. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.